All right, so today we're diving into Japanese philosophy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, specifically the work of Kitaro Nishida.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's often called the father of modern Japanese philosophy.
So
So,
that's a big deal.
yeah, we're not just talking about like one person's ideas, but like a whole shift in thinking. And
Right.
our guide for this deep dive is this book called Empty, Intelligibility, and the Philosophy of Nothingness.
Oh, wow, that's
It's a collection of Nishida's essays. And get this, it even tackles these huge concepts like absolute nothingness
Yeah.
and like whether logic has limits. Ready to have your mind blown?
yeah, ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the things that I find really fascinating about Nishida is how he blends Eastern and Western thought.
Oh, yeah, how so?
Well, imagine weaving together ideas from Shintoism, Confucianism, and Zen Buddhism, and then throwing in some Plato, Hegel, and Kant
Wow,
for good measure.
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a really unique mix.
It is a very unique mix.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that draws a lot of people to his work.
Yeah, and honestly, I struggle with philosophy sometimes. It
Yeah.
can get really abstract.
That's a very fair point,
Yeah.
especially with Eastern philosophy, which often uses a different language than Western thought. Nishida's writing, for instance, is deeply influenced by Japanese aesthetics.
Yeah.
He uses imagery and emotion in ways that can be challenging to translate into the kind of logic-driven arguments
Right.
that we see in Western philosophy.
So how do we even begin to understand a concept like absolute nothingness,
Yeah,
which seems to be central to Nishida's work?
Right.
I mean, how can nothingness be the foundation of everything?
right. So it's not about saying that nothing exists.
Right.
It's instead, imagine a dynamic void, a creative force from which all things emerge.
Okay.
Think of it like the potential energy before a firework explodes.
Mm.
It's not nothing, but it's also not yet the dazzling display we see in the sky.
Okay, so it's like the source, the potential,
Exactly.
rather than just empty space.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Nishida's concept of absolute nothingness challenges traditional Western ontology,
Okay.
which often gets stuck trying to define the ultimate thing that exists.
Right.
Nishida says, no, it's not about a thing at all,
Okay.
but the very ground from which all things arise.
It's like he's saying the foundation isn't a building block. It's more like the space where all the building blocks come from.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Think about it like this Western philosophy often starts with being
Okay.
and tries to define what it means to exist.
Right.
Nishida flips this by starting with nothingness
Okay.
and exploring how everything arises from this dynamic void.
This makes me think about his logic of place, which I've heard is pretty different from traditional Western logic.
It is.
Can you break that down for me a little bit?
Sure. So think about how Western logic, like Aristotle's,
Yeah.
often relies on categories and definitions.
Yeah.
We use these categories to understand the world. Like, this is a table,
Okay.
that is a chair.
Yeah.
Nishida felt this approach was too limiting.
Okay, so instead of just saying this is a chair, what would be Nishida's approach?
He would ask, what is the chair's place in the world? Not just its physical location,
Oh.
but its context, its purpose, its relationships.
Okay.
Think of it like a tree.
Okay.
Western logic might categorize it as a plant,
Right.
but Nishida's logic would consider its relationship to the soil,
Okay.
the sunlight,
Uh-huh.
the birds nesting in its branches,
Yeah.
even its role in the ecosystem.
So it's less about labeling and more about understanding the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly.
That's cool.
And this emphasis on place and relationships brings us to a fascinating connection Nishida makes.
Okay, what's that?
The connection between art and absolute nothingness.
Okay, now I'm really curious about this.
Yeah.
I read that Nishida describes art as a relief cut out of the marble block of eternity. What does he mean by that?
It's a beautiful way to describe how art can reveal a deeper reality.
Yeah, but how can nothingness be something we experience through art?
That's the paradox, right?
Right.
But remember, Nishida's philosophy is all about embracing those paradoxes.
Okay.
Think about the feeling you get when you stand in front of a truly great work of art.
Yeah.
It's not just about the colors or the shapes, is it?
No, it's not.
It's a sense of awe,
Right.
of connection to something much larger than yourself.
Okay, so it's like the art is pointing to something beyond itself, to a deeper reality that we can sense but not fully grasp.
Exactly.
I'm starting to get it.
And Nishida believed that different cultures approach this relationship between art and the absolute in different ways.
Okay.
He saw Western art is often trying to capture the essence of a thing, while Eastern art, especially Zen art, is more about expressing the emptiness, the void from which everything arises.
Wow, that's a really interesting distinction.
Yeah.
It makes me want to go back and look at art with fresh eyes.
That's the power of Nishida's philosophy. It encourages us to question our assumptions and to see the world in new ways.
This has been an incredible start to our deep dive. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, me too.
Now I'm dying to know more about Nishida's take on history.
Yeah.
He has this idea that historical time is an eternal presence, which sounds like a total mind bender.
It is.
But we'll have to save that for later.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome back.
Yeah, so we were talking about how Nishida's philosophy really embraces those paradoxes.
It does.
Like, it seems like a lot of Western philosophy tries to find these neat and tidy answers for everything.
Yeah, just put everything in a box.
Yeah, exactly. Like, everything has to fit perfectly in a box. And Nishida's like, hey, the world is messy.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah, he's comfortable with those gray areas, the contradictions.
Yeah, and that's where I think his concept of the unity of opposites really shines.
Absolutely.
It's like he's not trying to force everything into one box, but rather he's saying, look, opposing forces are constantly at play.
Yeah.
And that's actually how they create meaning.
Yeah, through their dynamic interplay.
That makes me think about good and evil.
Okay.
Like, does Nishida even believe
Yeah.
in a clear line between good and evil?
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
He says our will itself
Okay.
isn't inherently good or evil.
Okay.
It's only when our will acts arbitrarily, when it goes against the idea, that it becomes evil.
So it's not about...
It's not the actions themselves.
Right. It's not about the specific actions. It's about the motivation behind them.
The motivation, think of it this way. A will that's disconnected from any higher purpose. A will that's purely selfish is what leads to evil.
Okay, so it's like aligning your actions with a greater good.
Exactly.
That's a really different way of thinking about morality.
Yeah, it pushes us beyond those simple categories.
Right.
Binary oppositions that we often get stuck in.
Now, we were talking about religion earlier, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Okay.
Because Nishida seems to find a common thread between Eastern and Western religious thought.
Right, he does.
But he also talks about the importance of absolute negation of the self.
Yes.
Can you help me make sense of that?
Sure. He sees the desire to connect with something larger than ourselves as a universal human experience. That's the religious impulse.
Right.
But to truly understand it, he says we need to let go of the ego, surrender our individual desires and attachments.
So you're saying we have to lose ourselves entirely?
Well, not necessarily lose ourselves, but maybe transcend the limits of our individual egos. Think of it like Buddhist nirvana, where the self dissolves into pure being. For Nishida, by letting go of our attachment to the self, we open ourselves to a deeper connection with the absolute.
So it's like recognizing that there's something bigger than us.
Exactly.
And connecting to that.
And that by holding on to our ego too tightly, we actually block ourselves from that connection.
I'm starting to see a theme here.
What's that?
It's like whether it's absolute nothingness or the unity of opposites or even religion.
Right.
Nishida seems to be pushing us to move beyond our limited
individual perspective.
Yes.
You're getting it. He's constantly challenging us to expand our thinking, to look beyond the surface, to embrace the complexity and interconnectedness of everything.
It's like he's saying the world is full of wonder and mystery.
It is.
But we have to be open to seeing it.
Exactly. And that's what makes his philosophy so compelling even today.
Yeah.
He gives us a new lens. To view the world, one that emphasizes interconnectedness, dynamism, and that constant dance between opposing forces.
Okay, so Nishida also talks about these different layers of being.
Right.
Like the natural world.
Yeah.
The world of consciousness and the intelligible world.
Yeah, those can be a little tricky.
They are tricky for me. I'm a little fuzzy on how those all fit together.
Yeah, so these layers aren't separate realms. But rather different levels of understanding. Think of it like this: the natural world is the one we experience through our senses. It's the physical world, the one science studies. The world of consciousness, on the other hand, is our inner world. Our thoughts, feelings, and choices.
So the natural world things just are.
Right.
But in the world of consciousness, we have the power to choose.
Exactly. It's where we become self-aware and act with intention.
And then there's the intelligible world.
Yes.
This one's always a little tricky for me.
It can be a little bit tricky. It's the realm of pure ideas.
Okay.
Concepts like truth, beauty, and goodness.
So is that similar to Plato's forms?
There are definitely parallels.
Okay.
But Nishida takes it a step further.
Okay.
He sees the intelligible world as the source of everything.
Oh, wow.
The ultimate ground of reality. It's where both the natural world and the world of consciousness originate.
So the intelligible world isn't separate from our reality,
Right.
but rather the foundation of it.
Exactly.
It's a really cool idea.
It is.
So how do we access this intelligible world?
He says we access it through a process of transcendence.
Okay.
It's about moving beyond our senses and our ego to tap into a deeper level of understanding.
So is he saying, like, everyone can achieve this level of understanding?
It's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
Nishida acknowledged it requires a lot of work, intellectual rigor, deep self-reflection, and a willingness to let go of everything you thought you knew.
It sounds like a spiritual journey as much as an intellectual one.
You're picking up on something important there.
Yeah.
Nishida's philosophy blurs the lines between those two.
Right.
He saw the pursuit of truth as a path to self-discovery and understanding our place in the universe.
So we keep coming back to this idea of self-negation, this need to let go of the ego. Why is it so central?
Well, he believed our ego, our sense of self, is actually an illusion, a barrier that separates us from true reality.
So by letting go of our ego, we're tearing down that wall and opening ourselves up.
Beautifully put.
To a more expansive way of being.
And this connects back to his concept of absolute nothingness. It's about realizing that our individual selves are rooted in something much larger, something beyond our limited understanding.
This reminds me of Nishida's idea that the world contradicting itself is yet identical with itself.
Yeah.
How can something contradict itself and still be itself?
It's a bit of a riddle, isn't it?
It is.
But he's getting at the inherent paradox of existence.
Yeah.
He sees the world as this constant interplay of opposing forces.
Yeah.
And instead of seeing those contradictions as a problem,
right,
he embraces them as the very essence of reality.
So the true nature of the world lies in the tension between those opposing forces, in the dynamism of their interplay.
It's not about finding one single truth, but about understanding how everything is connected, even things that seem to contradict each other.
So we're back to the unity of opposites?
We are.
This is amazing.
It's pretty incredible.
I feel like we've only just dipped our toes into his philosophy.
Yeah, we have. It's so rich and multi-layered.
Yeah. What's one key takeaway that you hope our listeners will ponder as they move forward?
I'd say it's this. Nishida's philosophy is an invitation to embrace paradox.
Okay.
To question everything, and to see the world as a dynamic, interconnected whole.
Okay.
It's about looking beyond the surface and finding meaning in the interplay of opposing forces.
I like that.
He challenges us to find beauty in the contradictions.
That's really cool. We'll be back in just a moment to continue our exploration of Kitaro Nishida's world. Okay, so welcome back
Again.
to our deep dive into the mind of Kitaro Nishida.
Definitely a lot to think about here.
We've covered so much already, from like absolute nothingness to the unity of opposites.
It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
It is. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to Nishida's thoughts on history. Because you mentioned this idea that historical time is an internal presence. And honestly, that one really threw me for a loop.
Yeah, I get it.
It sounds impossible. How can something that's already happened still be present?
So think about it this way. Like, think about a major historical event.
Okay.
Like the invention of the printing press.
Okay.
It happened centuries ago.
Right.
But its effects are still rippling through our world today.
Okay. Yeah.
We wouldn't have books, newspapers, or even this podcast without it.
Right. So it's not like the event itself is still happening.
Right.
But its consequences, its influence are still unfolding.
Exactly. And Nishida takes us a step further.
Okay.
He argues that the past, present, and future aren't like separate points on a timeline. They're all interwoven, influencing each other in a dynamic way. It's like a tapestry where each thread connects to every other thread.
So instead of seeing history as a straight line, we should see it as this intricate web of interconnected events.
Yeah.
Where everything influences everything else.
Exactly. He gives a really striking example.
Okay.
He says the Treaty of Versailles both caused World War II.
Wow.
And was at the same time annulled by it.
Okay, so he's saying that the treaty, like, created the conditions for the war.
Yeah.
But the war itself also, like, changed how we view the treaty.
Exactly.
Even made some of it irrelevant.
It's a really complex idea.
Yeah.
But it challenges us to see history not just as a record of what happened, but as a living force.
Yeah.
That continues to shape our present and our future.
That's a really powerful way to think about history. It's not just something we study.
Right.
It's something we live in.
Yeah.
That shapes us.
Exactly. And this connects back to this idea we keep coming back to.
What's that?
That we need to move beyond our limited individual perspective.
It's like he's saying the world is full of wonder and mystery.
It is.
But we have to be willing to expand our minds.
We do.
To see it.
And that's the beauty of diving deep into philosophy like Nishida's.
Yeah.
It challenges our assumptions, stretches our thinking, and I believe it helps us live richer, more meaningful lives.
I agree. This deep dive has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much, but also have so many more questions now.
Right.
For our listeners who are feeling the same way, what would you recommend if they want to keep exploring Nishida's ideas?
I would encourage everyone to check out the full text of Empty, Intelligibility, and the Philosophy of Nothingness.
Yeah, that's a great book.
It's definitely a challenging read,
Yeah.
but it's packed with insights that will stay with you long after you finish reading.
We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes.
Perfect.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we sign off?
If there's one thing I hope you take away from our exploration of Nishida, it's this: embrace the paradox. Don't shy away from the complexity of life and the big questions. Be curious. Be open to new ideas. And keep searching for that deeper understanding.
Beautifully said. Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
On this deep dive into the fascinating world of Kitaro Nishida. Until next time.
There you go.
Keep exploring and keep questioning.